Welcome to the RocketPD podcast. I'm your host, Corey Murray. I'm a longtime education journalist and co-founder of RocketPD, here to bring you real talk with educators confronting what's broken in America's schools and hopefully offering up some advice and solutions about how to help fix it. Whether you're out to engage families, center students in their learning, or empower teachers and staff, we're going to cover the gamut, giving you ideas and frameworks that you can start using today. So what do you say? Are you ready to launch? Then let's get into it.
We're talking about standing up to intolerance. Now, that action step to stand up to intolerance is not simply tolerance. See, tolerance is compliance. It's compliance. Tolerance is neutrality. When you see something and you recognize it, you may feel bad, or you may know something needs to happen, but you do very little or do nothing. That is tolerance. What we're asking for is engagement.
Dr. Luvelle Brown is an author, educator, and former AASA Effie A. Jones Humanitarian Award winner. As a school leader, he has emerged as a champion for change in the area of school culture and a leading advocate for student inclusion.
We're asking for folks to understand what's happening and why, and then use their positional influence, use their thinking, use their privilege to do something, interrupt, to be at a meeting, to counter some rhetoric and narratives at a public comment session with some accuracy and some facts and some lived experiences and some stories.
In this episode of the RocketPD podcast, Dr. Brown and I talk about the inflammatory, often hurtful rhetoric that public school leaders and educators face when working in the school system today. I asked Dr. Brown, what does it take to create a truly inclusive learning environment where students and teachers feel supported and encouraged to do their best work?
See, we're asking folks to not just be tolerant, but to be engaged, and that is different.
We tackle courageous conversations that today's school leaders need to have if they want to change the public discourse for the better. Stick around until the end, where Dr. Brown details a group he's pulling together later in the year that will help you entertain and invite courageous conversations within your own school community. All right. Hey, Luvelle, good to have you. I know we're talking a little bit about, intolerance and injustice in schools, and I thought I would just throw a couple stats your way that I came across that, really made me take a step back. But, there's so much negativity out there, and I think the stats kind of, really show that. And so one of the ones that I saw was it says, and I think this is, if you guys want to take a look at this, by the way, this is from a Gallup study that came out recently, but it says Americans' confidence in U.S. public schools remain low, with 28% of people saying they have a great deal or quite a great deal of confidence in their school institutions. Now, that's similar to last year, down a little bit. It was 32%. But if you go back to 2020, right before the pandemic really started to kind of really kick off, we're down from about 41%. So you can see that public confidence in K-12 education in particular has really, started to fall off. And I know that you've just published a new book with Shelley Berman. You guys are talking about how to stand up to injustice and intolerance in K-12 education. I mean, this is a big deal. Confidence is shaken. Let's talk a little bit, if we could, about what you were hearing as you wrote the book, as you talk to people. Why are people so down on public schools right now?
Thank you, as always, for the conversation, Corey. Thank you for taking on this topic. Thank you for your courageous leadership and your interest in engaging with me on this particular topic. Why folks are so down on public education? I wouldn't say folks are so down now more than any other time in our nation's history. I think the conversations are somewhat cyclical, and I think we're living in a bit of a time loop. And the more we talk about access and opportunities for everyone, there will be folks who will resist that. And I think now in the age of social media, the ways in which the politics have become more and more polarized, folks, their deep cultural beliefs and their ideologies are there for everyone to see. And what's different now, as my dad would say, is that people aren't wearing masks or hoods. Yeah. They're putting their names next to this. And the language is coded. The language is very specific. The language is divisive. The language is harmful. And, from my lived and professional experiences, I've seen that throughout my life. But again, what I'm seeing that's different now is how bold folks are with it. And frankly, people in positions of power, which we've seen before, are now repeating that rhetoric with no consequences.
Why do people feel so emboldened now? Is it just that politics has gotten so nasty? Like, what is it about this current climate that has just lit the fire like we've never, seen before?
While politics play a big role, I would say it's all about power. Power, from my perspective, transcends politics. Power, when people feel like they are giving up something, especially people who believe in a zero-sum game. If you achieve or if you get something, I am now losing something. So those folks, they see themselves giving up something involuntarily, and they're fighting for it. And most of that is power, influence. As a country that's becoming more and more diverse, more and more people of color, more and more people of color who are being educated and who are having a voice, who are shifting the ways in which communities look, the ways in which laws and policies are being written and interpreted. Folks are threatened by that. Yes, it can become political, but that is in your backyard with your neighbors. That's not always about politicians and politics. It's about who am I and who do I want to be surrounded by and influenced by, and who do I want, in our context, who do I want my kids surrounded by and influenced. That's why we're having conversations about standards and books and detracking and the nature of schools and the demographic makeups. It's about people and their power.
Now, the book is called The Call to Courage, Standing Up and Speaking Out Against the Assaults on Democracy, Educators, and Students in America's Schools. I say that because, this book is not about necessarily talking about the problems. We're going to talk about the problems in the book, but it's about what do we do to stand up to those problems? What are some of the things that we as educators or people who support public education can do to kind of set the record straight, to get people moving together in a positive direction? So can we talk a little bit about, not just what the mindset is and where we're at, but how we start to shift that thinking so we can get back to doing the good stuff that public schools do?
Well, thanks for asking. I think this is where the second book picks up where my first one left off. We must continue to be reflective about what's happening and why. That's why in the Call to Courage, we really do an analysis of the historical nature of public education and how we got here and how time continues to show us, how history is showing us that it's repeating itself or at least rhyming. So reflecting on who we are and why we have the system that we have and how and why it's being perpetuated then can lead to the kind of friction that's needed right now. In order to change something, you got to be aware of it. And then you need to build support. You need to build capacity. We need to build an understanding about action steps. We need to take action. See, the enemy to everyone having access and opportunities is neutrality. And folks who see things that need to happen and then they don't do much about it, or who don't have the courage or lack the courage to do anything because they fear retaliation, they fear losing a job, they fear conflict. So that friction and conflict we talked about in my first book, but now in the second one, we're really talking about what that looks like. And there are leaders across our country who are engaging in that kind of courageous friction and conflict. And then there is the policy. See, in order to continue this journey towards responsiveness and this journey towards equitable access and opportunities for everybody, there needs to be policy changes. And what does a policy look like? What does it look like? What words are on the pages? Yeah. What words do we interrupt and take off of pages in order to promote a more inclusive environment for everyone? And see, that policy changes, those policy changes allow for us to slowly change the culture. And I stress in the second book that this is an ongoing conversation, dialogue, and this is ongoing work. It takes years to do this. Reflection, the friction and conflict, and then the actual policy changes. And then we do it again.
Yeah, so interesting, right? This idea that standing up to intolerance isn't just more rhetoric, right? You're actually talking about, yes, we have to correct the narrative, but then we actually have to do something about it. And that isn't necessarily always easy or ever easy to do, right? You kind of got to dig in. You've got to make sure you can navigate the politics. You've got to make sure that you can communicate the policy changes, and not just communicate them, but then get people in your organizations to actually embrace those changes and start to do that work, maybe in a different way or in a way that they hadn't thought of before. So, you've run a school organization. You not only write about books, you run school organizations. You understand how difficult it is to actually create change within a system. Can we talk a little bit about, once you've talked about it, even once you've changed the policy, how do you get people moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about standing up to intolerance. Now, that action step to stand up to intolerance is not simply tolerance. See, tolerance is compliance. It's compliance. Tolerance is neutrality. When you see something and you recognize it, you may feel bad, or you may know something needs to happen, but you do very little or do nothing. That is tolerance. What we're asking for is engagement.
Yeah.
We're asking for folks to understand what's happening and why, and then use their positional influence, use their thinking, use their privilege to do something, interrupt, to be at a meeting, to counter some rhetoric and narratives at a public comment session with some accuracy and some facts and some lived experiences and some stories. See, we're asking folks to not just be tolerant, but to be engaged, and that is different. And in organizations, particularly now, public organizations, we need folks to engage. You can choose not to be actively participating in Board of Education meetings, but you can also choose to be actively involved, or even serve in some capacity. So that's what I would offer on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like, too, I think it's not just the job of the superintendent, right? Or the head of that school or the school board. I think what you're saying and what I think is so cool about this book, what you and Shelley have done is like, this can be an organizational wide or community wide effort, this standing up to intolerance. If you can state the case the way that you've talked about with data, with personal experiences, really everybody has a role to play, right?
Everybody has a role to play. And we're asking everyone to be courageous, because when making the decision to be engaged, one must be aware and expect the resistance. Now, when that resistance comes, and I've seen it, I've experienced it, what do? Do you retreat to your neutrality? Do you ask someone else to do it in your stead? Or do you lean in for what is right and what is wrong, knowing that it may come at cost?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm asking for. And we're seeing the average tenure for a superintendent in urban settings right now is 2.1 years. Superintendents all over the nation are finding themselves in tough situations. And when they become tough, typically folks are transitioning out of the role. So it's bigger than the leader of the organization. This is about a community effort. And the leader only survives or only does this in a sustainable way if there is a significant amount of support.
Now, let me ask you, so let's say that you galvanize support, you get your community behind you, everyone is working and building the case together. How does the mood in the school system start to change? What does it look like when the community is feeling good about public schools, when they're facing down injustice, they're building the case for equality? What does that start to feel like? Because I think you can talk about all the things you have to do, but there's a mood and a feeling. And, I'd love for you to kind of explain sort of as a leader how you see that.
I hope folks who are listening will at least appreciate my close to 30 years of experiences with what you're asking, and the last 14 as superintendent. What I can say to folks, and they may not want to hear this first piece, is that it will not be calm. It will not be folks being happy with the leader. It will not be folks smiling and not coming to board meetings. The kind of work we're talking about will create, I don't want to say chaos, but it will be disruptive. It will require folks to be uncomfortable. It will come with significant resistance, attempts to discredit leaders and board members, voting board members off, failing budgets. I've seen and experienced it all, personally and professionally, that when doing this work well, it will be controversial. It will challenge you. And you must know that you must continue on. and hope that you've inspired somebody to take your place when you transition out and when you're gone. But people will come, and it will be difficult. And if it's not loud, if it's not controversial, you're not doing the work.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about students for a second, sort of, the recipients at the end of all of this. And the reason that we're doing it is for students. It's to provide opportunities for people to learn, to reach and exceed their potential. And I'd love to just hear your thoughts. And I know you have a great personal story from your own life about, how you succeeded in spite of challenges. And I know that that's something that's near and dear to your heart. So tell me a little bit about sort of the end result, what we're going for, and why this work is so important.
Yeah, when you see a first generation college student who also was the first young man or woman or person in their families to have graduated high school, when you see them achieving at the highest levels in a school district that was not built for them, that's rewarding. That means at times that you've shifted policies and mindsets. I've experienced that. That requires mentorship. That requires some one-on-one relationships. That requires us looking at data that is driven by student responses to surveys, testimonials, focus groups. When truly empowering student voice and agency, it will change everything you do. The curriculum, the data you look at, the pedagogies, everything. And when young people are included in that way and in that work, they will achieve in ways they have not before. And when you see that, you can't unsee it. That's rewarding. That's why we are educators. That happened for me. That happened for me, though, by accident. And many of the people I went to school with did not achieve, and they didn't get lucky. I'm here now to build systems and structures and put those in place that will allow for that kind of beautiful story to happen by design and at scale, not by accident. So that's the work. I've seen it happen. It's glorious when it does happen. And I'm hoping that along with me, other folks join in on making that happen for many others as well.
Cool. I want to talk about language for a second and words. There are so many words out there that are lightning rods right now, right? I think we all believe and want the same things. We want access for education. We want opportunities for all students. And yet for some reason, our society gets hung up on different words like equity, phrases like DEI. How do we get past sort of the words to focus on the meaning and get people moving, in that direction of we all want the same things. Let's get past the words that we're using so that we can achieve the results I think that everybody would hope to see in their communities.
Well, I suppose language is important. One, I think there needs to be an awareness that language is important. And with that awareness of how powerful and important language is, then everyone must be aware that language has been used to dehumanize. Language has been used to sort and select and to exclude. Now, with that awareness and understanding, then folks can be empathetic, be somewhat trusting and honest about the words that are being used and not being used. And with that awareness, then it leads to the friction. So for me, when I hear folks saying which words not to use, I'm listening for which words they're asking for me to insert instead.
Yeah.
And in both scenarios, if you truly listen, it's about dehumanizing or excluding certain populations of young people and communities. Because if truly inclusive and wanting to be representative of everyone, then we will ask and be open to using the language that certain populations and groups wish to use. Let me be clear, I'm from a marginalized population in this country. In data in this country, I identify as a population of young people who typically do not do well in schools based on standardized assessments, based on grades, attendance, you name the academic indicator. And so for me, when I am thinking about language to be used in schools, I want people to use words like equity because I want that. Now, in response to me wanting folks to use the word equity when referring to my identity, folks are saying no, and that is wrong. And even if saying not to use words like diversity, let's just sit with how that makes me feel. Now, I'm not asking anyone to not engage in the dialogue, and I'm not criticizing or judging the words in which they use, but I am asking for folks to hear me when I say what I feel and how I feel when certain words are being used or being excluded from the dialogue today. Now, I'm open to what other folks have to share. I just ask for folks to be open to what I'm sharing as well. Language is important. And we need to listen to what's being used and what's not being used, and then ask the question, why?
Now, in the call to courage, are you guys offering up some ideas and solutions, frameworks about how to do this more effectively? Is it more just sharing stories? How are you bringing that message forward in the book?
We give multiple ways to get at the same conversation. Yes, we provide protocols, for example, for folks who are coming to this brand new and want structure on how to lead the conversation. You can find protocols to use when talking with 100, or 1,000 people. And then, there's language we provide that folks can use that can be calling folks in versus calling them out, that can be used to unify, that can be used to educate. Language. And yes, we use stories too. You see, the call to courage is going to require folks to be significantly engaged and to feel like this is a moral imperative. You only get that kind of emotional response to the work when you are able to access stories. Yeah. And stories, particularly from folks like you and I, who come from a population of young people who have been excluded in schools. Yeah. When you hear that story, it should elicit an emotional reaction that I hope will lead to engagement, even if the engagement is about learning what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's really important, this idea of story. Everybody has a story. Can we hear everyone's story and take that into account as we're making decisions? I think that's a very, very powerful thought. I would ask you, you've been at this for a while, right? There are leaders that are coming in to the superintendency that are aspiring to be leaders within their school systems. What would you tell your younger self right now if you're wading in to school leadership, maybe for the first time, and you're seeing all of this rhetoric and all of this division that is taking place?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. If I was talking to my younger self, I hope that person would have much more hair. And I would say to that person, this is a long journey. Think about your 50 and your 70-year vision for the work and focus there. Early on, I've seen other newer administrators get caught up into what's going to happen right now, tomorrow, next year, and are making decisions hoping that they will change and fix all of this over the course of a small tenure or the course of one strategic plan or over the course of one evaluation cycle. That's just not going to happen because the reflection, the friction, and the policy shifts are going to require decades of this work. This is not checkworthy work where you can check a box with one professional development session or one retreat or one superintendent. This is equity work, and we've been at this for generations and will be at it for generations longer. I did not have that patience and that awareness and understanding early on. So I would have told myself, because I made short-term decisions that impacted the long-term results.
Yeah.
Now I'm making decisions with the ultimate goal in mind, knowing that I may not ever see the fruits of my labor. My mother taught me that, if I could share, Corey, that, she was an activist, and she would refer to herself as an abolitionist. And she helped me understand what abolitionists, who they were and how they thought. They knew they would never see the fruits of their labor, but they kept fighting anyway. I see us as educational leaders who are courageous working as abolitionists. We may not ever see what we're working for, but we do it anyway.
Well, certainly there is a cause here that's greater than any one person or any one decision. I think that's a great way of thinking. Now, I know in addition to the book, you guys are pulling something together a little bit later this year, a way to help people kind of not only understand some of the concepts and ideas, but also put that stuff into practice. So I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about the group you're pulling together this fall and how people might get involved.
It's fascinating. Already we have folks from all over the nation who are committing to being a part of this dialogue and the work. And the work and the dialogue as part of this cohort, it will involve us reflecting on existing practices, how we got here, why we're here. It will include very specific strategies that we each can use individually and collectively to move the work forward. It will provide example policies that should be shifted, policies that have been shifted. So we will go through the protocol and the work that needs to take place. And we're doing that with very diverse voices from very disparate and different places throughout the nation. So we're so excited. And I hope we get more and more people to join.
I think I saw recently that there's maybe people from 10 or 12 different states already who are coming to this, and I think there's more on the way. So if you guys are interested in that, I'll put the link down below in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on your audio channel, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, wherever it might be, you can go to RocketPD.com and you can check the details out there, but it's 5 sessions. It's all over Zoom, and Luvelle and Shelley are going to lead people through, some ideas and some strategies for how to stand up to that intolerance that I think we're feeling and facing in schools. So, hey, Luvelle, I want to thank you again for hanging out with me for a few minutes today. This has been great. Really appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule and sharing with us. And I hope to have you back real soon, because I know this work continues, as you said, and there is no end point. So I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Hope so. Thank you, Corey. It has been
an honor. Take care. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the RocketPD podcast. I'm your host, Corey Murray. We hope you found today's conversation insightful. If you enjoyed what you heard, consider clicking that like button and subscribing to our channel. You can download the RocketPD podcast wherever you find your favorite pods. We're also on YouTube. Just search for RocketPD. At RocketPD, we're on a mission to empower the world's teachers and staff. To learn more about our work and the community we're building together, visit us anytime at RocketPD.com. If you're an educator and you're listening to this, remember, your work matters. So be well, do right, and let's keep up the fight.